Right.
Yeah, you're in.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, Boker Tov. So let me ask you a question before we start looking at the text of the Megillah. I'll give you a question and a second question to explain it. The question is, where does the real story of the Megillah begin? The real Purim story, where does that begin? And if you had to, if you were in charge, if someone came to you who knew very little about Judaism, but really wanted to know about Purim, and it says, I have 15 minutes, can you tell me about Purim? And you have to, decide, what you're going to choose. It's like, what would you leave out? What would you put in? Where would you start the story? Where would you start the story if you had a hard time? Your time was short and you had to get the main facts. What would be like number one that you would put up?
Location, to me, would be the location.
Location,
where it happened, where it was, when. And then when, yes.
And why would the location make a difference, actually?
Because
You would want to know where it happens.
You want to know, but is it important to know that?
yes,
Like for example, what's the message of the Megillah?
that
Wait, Margaret.
No, she's talking.
No, that's right, but she started. Now someone takes over. It's good. It's good. It's good.
Well, how did the Jews get to this area?
Is that the message of the Megillah?
So the
Does
Megillah
it
belongs
matter?
no.
We have a Hanukkah miracle took place in Israel. So it's like
No, has
It,
nothing to do with.
it does matter because that's the history, that's part of the history of the Jews. They were in Galus Bavel, and once we went into Galus Bavel, what happened there, that affects our whole life.
okay, all
our
right, good
whole
thought. Listen,
knowledge.
obviously you know where the Megillah starts, obviously. So I'm pushing some buttons here. But okay, Karen and then Harold.
So it's a well-woven story, everything really weaves together. However, if I had to, boil it down into a quick thing, I would go with Mama, because he was the anti-Semite.
But he lived in that city.
And the whole story I think is about, salvation and how Esther saved the people. And
All right, so if the main message is salvation and thanking Hashem, which appears really to be the main message, and the Megillah is viewed as being a substitute for Hallel, it is the Hallel for that day, so then it wouldn't really matter where it took place.
Right.
Okay, but Harold, then Barbara.
I would start with the destruction of the first base of Memphis.
Well, you have more time on your hands, but if you had less time on your hands, okay?
I still think we should have a Shushan community.
But that's not, actually doesn't even start with Shushan per se. It doesn't start your way, right? The Megillah.
We know what it is,
Okay,
but they start with Mordechai and Esther.
but Mordechai is not till chapter 2, actually. And the truth is that,
Didn't read it the last year.
1 second. Yes, Barbara. Okay.
No, I think
I
the
remember.
point of the story is the small against the mighty. Here again, just like in Hanukkah. How that evolves is the whole story, and I don't know, this is gonna be like what you're thinking, but there's no mention of Hashem in it. And when we think of the small against the mighty with the Jewish people's history, we always tie that to the support of Hashem and the direction and the control of Hashem. So that is the interestingness here.
Well, I would have to confess that often you do know my thinking because, we get to see each other. But that's my wife, in case, Albert, that's my wife, so that was an inside joke. But right, I wasn't thinking like that, but Purim becomes like very important to us because it is in Golis, and we don't have a Navi. There are no prophets, And it's not as if Hashem told Mordechai, this is what you should do, Mordechai. And Mordechai made these decisions by himself in terms of taking certain action. So, so that is part how it affects our life today, where we don't have Nevi'im practicing yet. So that makes it even closer to us in terms of what realities could be, the way Hashem functions, and the fact that Hashem may not, be so obvious. He may not, be splitting seas today to get things done, and yet it seems that Hashem was very much involved. All right, so that question that I started out with really was sparked by a comment that Rav Soloveitchik made. I think most of my planned remarks would be based upon Rav Soloveitchik, but I think Rav Soloveitchik also would say that if you really wanted just to know, the storyline of how Esther got to be queen, and the difficulties that eventually arose. It didn't happen right away. Esther was queen for 4 or 5 years or so before the problem with the Haman started. But if you wanted to know that, then if you go to chapter 2, that's what chapter 2 starts with with Achashverosh thinking about the now either executed, probably more likely executed, but whether it's executed or exiled Vashti, that's where it starts. And in fact, well, maybe we'll get to that in a little bit. But so the question is, you really would appear on the surface that you could get the whole story. I mean, we don't really need to know we need to know about Achashverosh's parties. And that's what we need to know that.
Yes, because that was a decision to kill his wife or the queen.
But what does that really matter per se? That's the question. That's a great question, Carl. Like that, does it really matter to us who preceded Esther, or does it matter to us that Esther was in the palace?
That's a good question. Why? Why is it important?
No, but after she.
Wait a second. You just agreed with me?
No, after she was killed and they are looking for another queen.
Yeah, but you should have
Then it
started
starts.
there. We don't need the whole story of Vashti and the palace.
Yeah, but we need that she's not, that's why.
No,
We'll
we
see.
don't
We don't necessarily need that. But just when you look at chapter
We don't
1,
need the story of
the truth is, if you want to know how a Jew should not behave, chapter 1 is the chapter to read.
Don't go to the.
It's amazing, truthfully. I mean, there are
Don't go to the
details there
bar.
that we wouldn't even want to speak in conversations that are included in the Megillah.
So this is what I was gonna say. In Megillah Esther, it's a lot of Musa Haskell for the Jew, for us to learn how to behave in many, many, many ways. And it's also not only Megillah of Musa Haskell, it's also a Megillah of how the Rebbeinu Shalom runs the world, and he always prepared refuah lamaka. He always prepared some kind of a medicine for whatever bad is going to happen to the Jews. Even though he punishes us, he already preparing some kind
But
of
what?
a healing, a way
Right,
to.
right.
Yeah, so this
Esther
is
is
really
queen
what-
before Haman is
But here God didn't punish us.
promoted.
Why is she
But-
saying God punished us?
I didn't catch that
Why
word.
do you say God
But-
punished us in the Megillah? Why do you say God punished us? God saved us. didn't
She-
punish us.
No, wait a minute. You're talking about the end. I'm talking, it still was a punishment at the time
was
when
scary.
Haman came with all these zeros. It was a fear and a punishment.
Yeah,
for
the
us.
other thing,
We
right,
suffered.
our
And trusted that he
source was weak,
And
and
then he redeemed us.
there's a significantly long list of things that we can learn from Perek Aleph. Some within the context of the story, some will be more important than others, and others are important just in terms of Jewish life. You're right, and and it is important to catch those. And it's also right that you could say that one of the reasons that we had to know about the parties is because Chazal says we were eating the tray food at the parties too, that a lot of Jews were there, dressing up, having a good time. And that weakens our merit in Hashem's eyes. So that opens us up to potential difficulties.
But you can also say that the Jews were accepted and they felt
Right, but
there
that's
wasn't a Bezeros against the Jews at that time.
right. So, but if they really felt accepted, they could have said, please order me glatt kosher.
Well, that's all right.
You
But
know,
I don't
that's-
think, I'm not sure if glatt kosher was already in ours.
We don't need the glatt. Just drop, Corinne, drop the word glatt. Admit it, you're right. But, yes.
Wasn't the
Oh,
time also a
because
he was
celebration
joking.
of the conquest of Yerushalayim, and they should not have participated in such a party? That's what we celebrate.
It wasn't the main, it probably was not the main part, but maybe we'll take a look at that momentarily. Right. So if we look, a follow-up question to basically why do we need Perek Aleph, it would be that, okay, granted, we need Perek Aleph, the first Perek for some reason. So why does it need, how should it open up? So example, I think at least two of you, maybe three of you really said that maybe you should open up that it should say, and it came to be during the Babylonian exile, But the Megillah opens up by Hivi Achashverosh. Right away to Achashverosh. Why not put it in that broader context of being the Babylonian exile with Babel being conquered by the Persian Empire? This is the Persian Empire. So why don't we start that way? And that's also a question for Rav Soloveitchik. And basically, Rav Soloveitchik's answer to that question is that the whole dangerous scenario that developed for the Jewish people was only because Achashverosh was the king at that time. That it was like such an absurd type of plot that wound up developing that somebody who was more rational than Achashverosh was, it would not have left the opening to develop this story.
He was
So-
sorry afterwards, but later.
He was sorry only about Vashti, maybe.
Yeah, yes.
That will take a look, but it's more than just Vashti being removed from her throne, Karen.
Yeah, it also.
I don't want to disagree with Rob, but if that were true, we wouldn't have all the anti-Semitism we've had throughout the ages. I mean, he wasn't the only one who allowed it to happen.
Right.
No, obviously that he wasn't the only one that allowed it to happen, but because there was somebody like this kind of personality, this could happen. It's like, if you have a president, it doesn't mean that there haven't been a zillion bad presidents, but if you have one, person in charge that is not as astute of what's going on, maybe, or permits certain things to go on, or,
Well, we'll learn a little bit more about Achashverosh. Yes, those are good points. There's only one other exile that we could compare the situation to, and that would be the Egyptian exile. So it's not, there are certain things, and Rav Soloveitchik actually it weaves in some comments that refer to the Nazis. And even with the Torah codes, there are Torah codes that reveal the hanging of 10 of the SS officers that relate to the hanging of Haman's 10 sons, which is interesting that exists. But it's true that when we see certain things developing, there is a trend, unfortunately, in the world that with a cycle of time that we are exposed to some horrible anti-Semitism. That is true, but what Rav Soloveitchik was saying, I think, is that in this case, what triggered this event was Achashverosh. It wasn't wasn't the economy per se. It wasn't other things, but it was something about Achashverosh's But let me just say, did I hear Michael also or not?
Well,
And
I
then-
was gonna say, I agree with Karen, I absolutely do, because it's not only Egypt. When the Jews in Russia and the Cossacks attacked and.
But that's afterwards. I'm saying in Jewish history wise, you only have two real
Stalin
exiles.
was evil to the Jews as well. and
Right,
even
I'm
the-
saying that, but this is only the second episode in Jewish history of having, this is also before Purim, before Hanukkah, I mean.
Yeah, I
So-
wouldn't say, even at that time, it wasn't the second episode. Amalek was still Amalek before Haman was part of Amalek. There's always been.
Yeah, but Amalek
Unfortunately,
didn't reach any significant stage before he was quieted down. So this is erupts to a major stage, and it had the potential to be much more reaching than even in Egypt, because Paro only wanted to eliminate male boys, future soldiers from being born. He didn't want to get rid of all the Jewish people. So this is of the two exiles that we had, this is the more intense and more extreme.
Yes, but the population eventually, when Haman ordered, the Jews to be killed, there were a lot of people who wanted to kill him. And after all,
Absolutely.
nobody fought back.
That's what I'm saying. It's a much broader case of what's happening. So Harold and then Carla and Albert, is your hand up also?
Not yet.
Okay.
This goes back to why I said the destruction of the base of Mikdash, but I believe in the Persians say that one part of what took place at the party that Achashverosh had was displaying the items from the base of Mikdash. And it does seem as though he is very significant right from the start. First pasuk says, "Vayibnei Achashverosh," and then it repeats, "Hu Achashverosh." So he's really stands out. So we could have had anti-Semitism before, but among our long history, some individuals sort of stand out more than others. And we see that Achashverosh would be in that category. He had the audacity to think that the base of Mikdash is past history, and I guess there was this prophecy of the 70 years or whatever period it was. And we thought they could overcome.
So two comments read from that. One is, and for sure with Hitler Yivach Shemo, we could make related comments, but Rav Soloveitchik is going to point to really psychological issues that Achashverosh had, which allowed a lot of things to get out of hand. So we could also say, that, I mean, there are certain, maybe many despotic leaders, have certain mental health issues, but this is going to play a role. This was not something that necessarily reared its head. I'm not saying that everybody were Jew lovers, but this seems to have been, allowed to trigger, because of decisions that Achashverosh made himself. It wasn't coming from the common people. Yes.
How can you blame Achashverosh if not for Haman? Where do you see a sign that Achashverosh would do anything bad to the Jews?
Hold on, we'll see that.
I mean,
We'll take-
how can you blame him?
We'll take a look. Did I say somebody else?
I have a very interesting question. If you look in history, there was no king by the name Achashverosh. He
Xerxes, I
did
think
not
they say.
exist in the world,
Xerxes, I think.
in the world history. And
Okay, after class, we have one or two people have more. I just want to, because it is, time is marching on, so I want to get back into the Megillah, okay? So Rabbi Soloveitchik, used the word neurotic to describe Achashverosh's personality. The others paranoid. Now, and I think we're used to paranoid because Achashverosh was not a blood inheritor of the throne.
So what
He
is
was
it?
part of an overthrow,
So what
and
does the choice
he
do?
and not only that, but he had a very different type of personality. The Medrash says that, don't dismiss it. The Medrash, because you'll see that it plays out. The Medrash says that Achashverosh was a stable boy, and somehow made his way up and got to marry one of the ruling women.
So,
or wives of men who were executed, who were the rulers in the Persian Empire. But he was a coarse person. And that basically the rulers of the time were aristocrats, and they had a certain refinement to them, which Achashverosh did not have. He also, Soloveitchik feels that, so you say, Howard, you point out that Achashverosh is mentioned twice. It's only the second time that the word related to being in charge of a kingdom, but it's a verb, hamolech, is used. The fact that first Achashverosh is used without any title, and it takes 3 times until it says Hamelech Achashverosh is also a signal that he didn't start out being part of the royal family. But Rav Soloveitchik points out that the word Hamolech can be understood. We might normally hear in this English that I have in front of me says that who ruled,
yeah.
but it's in the Hoveh, which is ruled. It's funny. He ruled, meaning like he was the ruler then, but it is in the English is a past word to say ruled with a D at the end of it. Rav Soloveitchik, if you take the really pure Hoveh, it meant that he was still establishing his kingdom, that it wasn't totally solidified. And then you can understand also why he made a 6-month party. I mean, could you imagine? Have you ever been invited to a 6-month?
What?
A party that lasted 6 months? So what was he doing during those 6 months? He was trying to butter up the people who are in charge of these 127 provinces. That's a pretty big empire to be in charge of, and you need to have loyalty. So he was buttering them up with a lot of food and women and drink, and that's the way he was trying to win over, because he had a great fear that he himself could be deposed as well. He loses himself at which party? Now, he has 2 parties here. One is 180 days, and that's for the aristocrats, the leaders of the different sections of the empire. And then he has a 7-day party for the local people, for the plain old local people. In which party does he lose himself? When does he call Vashti?
That's when Vashti
Haman
was
was there.
Doesn't show now.
No, it's the second. It's the second
He's the
one.
one who
Yeah,
instrumented the
because
chief.
in the second one, so Achashverosh was able to hold out for 6 months. For 6 months, he masqueraded as if he was an aristocrat also, and he held back somewhat. But when it came to the 7-day party with the common folk, open bar, so that was his chevra. That's who he was. And he went to extremes.
Was the Jews in the first or the second?
The second, right? And so he, he's buddy with these guys, and he goes off with them, and that leads to, in his drunken state, it says, and on the 7th day his heart was really good with the wine. That's where he makes this disparaging in multiple ways. The end of it was disparaging, especially if you hold from the viewpoint that he only wanted the queen to show up only wearing a crown and nothing else would be, very disparaging. But he doesn't personally extend the invitation. He sends it through, his ministers. So and Vashti refuses, and what happens after that. But so reason number one that Soloveitchik gives for chapter 1 is to understand that there were weaknesses in Achashverosh that opened the door to a very decadent society, and when you have decadence, you have evil. And that's what develops. Soloveitchik also notes that at first glance he says, you could say, what do I need to know about all this stuff, these parties and this, and things that are so anti-Jewish, really, anti-halachic, going on. And Soloveitchik made the point that the events that at first we think have no relevance to the Jews, can be very relevant to the Jews. So this, particularly, and Rub makes the point, by the way, is that according to tradition, like if everything follows the prophesied role, the Mashiach will come after what? What will be the major event preceding the Mashiach? Exactly. What does that have to do with Jews, Gog and Magog? They're not Jewish nations. Exactly. It's a major event in the world. Having nations fight against one another. Some want to say that it happened already, World War II, and maybe some would say it's about to happen again.
But it's also Mala'ach the Ayat Hashem. So the whole world should believe in God. So
At some point.
Well, before that, the Mashiach will not come, right?
No, the Mashiach's role is to help people do what's right in this world. The world's not going to be perfect before the Mashiach comes. We need the Mashiach. It has to. The Jewish people have to be at a certain level, especially if we want the Mashiach to come earlier than Hashem's deadline for the Mashiach to come. So we have to be at a certain level. But the Mashiach's role, he has jobs to do, and
you think that will ever happen?
Of course, I think it.
Of
course, I think that. First of all, look where the world has come. There are many, far fewer less idol worshippers in the world today than there were in Abraham's time. Thank God, but they believe in Torah, right? So the fact that and we don't know time, we say that 1,000 years is like a day in Hashem's time, and we could say 1,000,000 years is like we talk about the 7 days of creation. Those days of creation could have been millions of years long. So we don't know what the time frame is, but prophetically, we have the Mashiach coming after this major battle between non-Jewish nations. We can say, just leave us alone. We have our place, and even if we're scattered around the world, we have our communities. I don't need to know from these other type of things, but we can't close our eyes to that, because it turns out that many world events wind up impacting the Jews. I mean, even currently right now, what's happening with Russia and countries of the West and stuff might also be emboldening Iran and how they're going to react to Israel and what they think the United States, how much intervention they would have. So these are events that affect us a lot, even though at first glance we don't think they affect us so much. So this is part of the message. The top message, though, is the psychological illnesses and the ethical lapses and the lack of morals that Achashverosh had. Certainly a lack of dignity for human beings, especially for women, that we see here. And then for one other very important, at least one other, but that this will be the last one I'll identify right now, is when Vashti is executed. So it's recommended to Achashverosh that he send out a notice to all the provinces. Make sure the man is the boss of the house. Right? That the man is the boss of the house. That's the edict that was sent out. That every woman has to listen to her husband. That was the edict that was sent out for Achashverosh. So even back then, people really thought that's a very strange thing. And they lost a lot of respect for Achashverosh. Because they understood, they weren't necessarily such moral people, but they understood that, first of all, this is what goes on really behind closed doors mostly. So who's going to monitor, what's going on behind closed doors, whether the husband's listening to what the wife is saying, not listening. I mean, there are political aspects to it. Some focus on the fact that just like Achashverosh married Vashti, and Vashti was, an heir to the throne. So these other people that they're talking about, maybe it's really, these other aristocrats and who now aristocrats and or other people who were part of the coup that took over in the empire, is that they should understand that what Vashti did could happen to them, as well. So they better take the lead of their husband, who's loyal to Achashverosh, and not follow the lead of Vashti, who demonstrated a rebellious act against, Achashverosh. But But anyway, but that people became very wary of this Achashverosh. And there was one other aspect of what happened here. And with this, we'll skip to Perek Bet. The next page in the middle of the column. So Perek Bet says, sometime later, when King Achashverosh's fury had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what was done to her. What does that mean? He remembered Vashti. First of all, is that good or bad?
It's a
And actually,
fact.
does he?
It's a fact. He can't change that anymore. He can just be sorry or nothing, but that doesn't change anything anymore.
There are different words for being remembered, like the Hashem Pakad et Sarah. Like
Yeah,
also
but that's
means-
in a good sense.
It is in a good sense, but usually that word is usually used in a bad sense, that you're going to get your punishment. And Zachar is usually, but not necessarily always, in a good sense. Rabbi Yasgur said here, it goes like the major way, that he remembered her with some fondness. Because, I think you have to say that, because what's the reaction of his servants to the fact that he remembered her? They say it's time to find you another wife. So obviously he was missing having a wife, so regretting something. What's also interesting is you don't look inside the text, okay? I'm gonna just read this pasuk again in English, and I'm gonna stop and you fill in the words, okay? So after these things, when Achashverosh's fury had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what?
Happened to her.
That when he was
Okay, it says here what she had done and what?
sending Sarah Lena.
Hashem Nixar Alea.
What does that
Whatever
mean?
happened to her.
Just like that had happened to her?
No, they.
Like she was walking down the street and an axe fell off the building and she was gone?
No, the punishment that she.
How did she get the punishment?
He himself did it.
Right. He decreed the punishment, right?
Right.
It doesn't say that in the pasuk.
No.
It just says it happened to her.
He doesn't want to say.
He doesn't, right. So why? Because, and in the Targum, the Aramaic translation to the Megillah, says that Achash says, well, how did this happen to Vashti anyhow? He says, well, you were in a good mood and you summoned the king and she didn't come and, was advised that she be executed and you approved it. He says, what? You saw I was drunk. You go ahead and execute the queen, knowing that I'm not in sound mind and body? And he executed the advisors, except for one.
Haman.
Right. And it's only because Haman, who possibly, if he's Muchan,
Who said that?
right, is that he played the king up so well that it didn't matter what anybody else said. He said, I'm the only one who wanted to save her. And even though the other people objected, he didn't do it. Achashverosh didn't believe the other people. So he goes with Haman and eventually he empowers him. But now what's happening with Achashverosh is the common people are mocking Achashverosh for this decree that every wife should listen to her husband. Okay, despite the fact that we have some people who like to see that decree today, I'm excluded from that. So people lost respect and said that's actually really a weird thing. And then in terms of the more elite, the advisors, so what happened when the advisors followed through on what Achashverosh said, that many of them got executed. So people, aware of this said, well, listen, next time the king says something, I'm not rushing to do it because I don't want to find out 3 weeks later, that the king changed his mind, is going to hold me responsible. And Rav Soloveitchik said that's what saved, actually, it's not that, it's the Gemara. The Gemara says that if it warrants for that letter, that went out, that every woman listened to what your husband says, that all the Jews would have been executed, killed by the neighbors who had enough anti-Semitism, hatred for the Jew, that all they knew is a little bit, but they were afraid, because when they found out the date, even they weren't supposed to find out the date, all the details anyway. So, but they were afraid, they could say, this is the same king who sent this stupid thing out. This is the same king who executed his advisors because they advised him to get rid of Vashti, and then, months later, he changed his mind. So they said, this is, and the decree was 11 months ahead. It's like we got almost as much time possible with the drawing of the lottery. It was 11 months away, so that's a lot of time for the king to change his mind. So people held back from doing anything that Achashverosh was going to say. So that's yeah. Anyway, so as a concluding sentence, those are some of the reasons why we need chapter 1. It's for the more subtle messages. If we just wanted to know about the Purim story, it would have been enough to start with Esther was made queen. Doesn't matter if the previous queen died or got executed. It wouldn't really matter to us per se at first glance. And we're introduced to Esther. A paragraph later, we're introduced to Mordechai, and then we have Haman rising to power eventually. And we could have started there, but there are these other messages that we needed to have. There's maybe one more that I'll add, but Michael, yes.
Yes, it's not that important, but since it says we've read it or missed Vashti, I have to assume, because later on he has a harem, that he had a harem at this time as well.
Right.
So why didn't he just raise one of his favorites from the harem to be the next queen?
I think the question is just the answer. I mean, we don't know that he didn't patronize, the resources that he had. But in terms of appointing another queen, he didn't think he wasn't motivated to do that. Maybe he was afraid, that that he'll have someone else give him trouble. Why does he need more trouble? He's better off going solo.
That's not right.
What's not
Because
right?
he said, יבקשו למלך נערות בתולות, they went all over to look for other girls before.
No, but Michael's saying why didn't this? I mean, well, they added to the candidates. Doesn't mean he didn't have a harem already.
Okay, so why?
They got more.
Okay, that's right. He went to look. He sent his,
But he didn't.
ויפקד המלך פקידים לכל מדינות.
איזה פסוק?
כל נערה בתולה טובת מראה פרק ב' פסוק ב'. He did send his שליחים. כל נערות בתולות טובות מראה שושנה בירה.
Right. Well, it's not the king's decision to the Yafke means that the king should give permission to have various staff people go around, right?
They did that. They went to look all over for Nara Betula.
Right, but this is a while after the execution. This is only after Achashverosh demonstrates that he has regrets.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's not that they didn't go look for other girls.
Right, but Michael's saying, why should that have even happened? He had women to choose from.
Well, obviously that wasn't enough for him.
Okay.
Otherwise,
Rabbi Green and Barbara and Harold, okay?
And just to follow on what you were explaining earlier, if Achashverosh's road to the throne had been through his marriage to this woman, and now she's been removed, it also means the nobility, other nobility, antagonistic perhaps, and therefore by calling, rather than taking an existing member of the family, what is he doing? He's following your example of going out among the general population, with whom he's more comfortable, who would be less perhaps threatening than other nobles who would establish a coup, and therefore choosing one of the, let's say, more common women as a queen who would be less apt to be threatening, and they're more somebody that he feels.
Mhm. So, yeah, those are great points. Interesting, I don't really know who was in the harem, before, right, where they came from. But those points, are good. I mean, it could also be, we see that from Achashverosh that, it was one time only, and he rejected obviously every candidate except Esther. And then they had to remain. They couldn't be released to the general population because they already were intimate with the king. So now it's passionate, that they should go back into the general population. But maybe also they wouldn't think of, going, so whatever those, maybe he knew those people already. Obviously the king didn't, express an interest in a shidduch with any of them. Okay, Barbara.
Maybe the women of the harem were friends with Vashti, maybe that was part of the,
Yeah.
government, whatever. They were like connected
Yeah,
there.
so I really don't know
This
who was in
way-
the harem,
No,
but
but this way, if he went, if he picked somebody like Esther, who for some, he didn't know exactly why, but she didn't have those kind of connections to other people. Because she was Jewish, but she was in a separate group, so maybe he liked the fact that this was like new. a
He didn't
new
know she was
area,
Jewish,
it's
no.
not connected. Yeah, I know, but maybe he knew that she didn't have those kind of connections politically, whatever, that some other people had, but definitely like those harem women could have been connected more with that.
Yeah. So I know of the opinion and it's saying that just like Achashverosh married Vashti, so he had other men, marry the widows of the executed previous leaders within the empire. And specifically, he wanted those marriages to take place, to give credibility. I mean, it's true that Vashti turned out not to be following, his plans, not that she did the worst thing per se. So there was, and I think that was common in those times that the men of the new regime would marry the older women, the other women, the originally married to officers, ministers, etc., to help cement the new leaders' place in the country or the empire. But to be further looked at. Harold.
Turning to the question of why the Megillah doesn't just start with Esther as queen, it would seem to me if it did, wouldn't we ask what's a nice Jewish girl doing a place like that? We need some explanations on how she got there.
But she was so beautiful.
No, but chapter 2 would take care of that. I'll tell you, it's interesting, that just I wanted to put this piece in when we started to speak. I said, I'll wait till later, close to it, but I'll mention it now. Many years ago, when I was head of a Central Agency for Jewish Education in New Jersey, I received a call from an actors group who had written up a script for a play about Megillat Esther story that they wanted to present to students. And they wanted my approval of it, a letter from me so they could show the schools and stuff. So I went to a rehearsal of it, or an early performance maybe. I don't remember if there were other people in the audience. And I told them that at least the main item of mine that I remember today is that they mistranslated, and they were Israelis, I think also, but so Israelis don't appreciate always, nothing personal here, but the finities of Dikduk, right? So let's just take a look when Esther, so it says in Perek Bet, Pasuk Chet, 8. That came to be when the order of the king, it wasn't his idea, but it was his order, about rounding up the young maidens. And when already, many young women were gathered in the capital of Shushan and under the charge of Haggai. How do you translate that?
She was taken against her will.
right? But tilakach is a pio, I think it is, and it means against your will. So they had this in the scene, they had the scene of Mordechai, like Esther being a little bit nervous. What happens if they come, to the house and they're looking for me, or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe she's straightening her hair and everything, and then Mordechai coaching her on for more. And that's not what the story says. That's not what the Megillah says. They changed it actually, afterwards. But so it wasn't. So Esther didn't want, and Mordechai didn't want Esther to be taken, but she was tilakach. She was taken against her, her own personal desires. So that's a very important part, to know. Also interesting is that if the Medrash is right, and that Esther was not just Mordechai's cousin and a younger cousin that he raised because she was an orphan, but that he eventually married her. So she should have been disqualified from this beauty contest as a married woman. But there was something about Esther that people gravitated to, and it seems that Achashverosh also sensed that. Not to necessarily mean he discounted other things, although it's possible that Esther wasn't such a beautiful woman. But there was a chain that she had that people felt her chain. Rav Soloveitchik, mentioned that, that chain emanates from inside. That's how spiritual a person is, and having Hashem's presence in them, and it radiates out. Other people pick this up. They may not even know what they're picking up, but they sense that something is different about that person. And we have the early example of that is by Yosef when he's in prison. I actually jotted down the.
But she was beautiful. She was
Reishi,
beautiful.
Lamitet. Breshit Lamitet. Pasuk Bet says, "Vayihi Hashem et Yosef, Vayihi Ish Matzliach." Hashem was with Yosef, and he was a successful person. And Vayihi Bevet HaMitzri, it's in his Egyptian master's home, and it says that his master saw that everything he does, Hashem is with him, and then the next book says, "Vayimsa Yosef Chen be'einav." Yosef found Chen. It didn't say that he was like, a super organizer, per se. It's this Chen that's connected with the Pasuk Bet. So it says, "Vayah Adonai ki Hashem ito," that his master saw that Hashem was with Yosef. So it wasn't just that he's good with the numbers and he's good with the organizations, that even, his master saw that there's something more spiritual about this person, something special about this person.
No, but it's not about Esther. She was your factor of it. She was beautiful. That was the main reason.
That was the main, right.
So
But there was still, but he picks her.
There's
Was
only
she
more
the
than
most beautiful woman around?
Yeah, and also if she was the most beautiful, it would have said the beauty part first. It would have said, the Yafat Torah would be the second thing.
Yeah, which pasuk are you looking at, Barbara?
In Vav.
In Perek. Get that?
Pasuk Zayin, it says.
Tovat Marek comes second,
Your factor of it about Mari, Pasuk Zayin.
but why didn't it say Tovat Marek first?
It doesn't matter. What is?
Yeah, they're both.
That's really why we have that.
Okay, but here, I'll conclude my remarks with this, then we still have a couple of minutes for questions if there are. But, think about this. Here you have a child, a young girl who had a difficult upbringing. Her parents died when she's young. That's very sad. And has the potential for really, having a lifelong impact on a person, and not always for the good. So and then she gets taken to the palace, which she didn't really want to be, by Tilakach. She didn't really want to be there.
Okay.
And even after she's elected, as the queen, appointed as the queen, nothing's happening in terms of Jewish history that we know of until years later. So there's a lot of things we don't know about, but she rises
Okay.
She arrived from a difficult life. You know, where a person could have had a lot of pity, you know, from people for having to grow up without parents, that she winds up being a Moshiach
Yeah,
you
so what
know,
do you wanna say?
for B'nai Yisrael.
Okay.
So, you know, so she did very well in her life.
And
Yes,
also
ma'am.
in, like in 9, when it says that when after he was taken, and it says the girl pleased him and obtained his kindness. It doesn't say about her beauty, you know,
Mhm.
it's about her kindness.
Right.
She was chosen before.
No, that's,
before
no,
the
but
beauty.
it says,
Child.
"Vatitav ha'na'ara be'einav, v'tisach chesed lefanav." Yeah, but that was, she found chesed in the eyes of everyone. And Achashverosh had at least that much, rational capacity that he was also able to feel. But maybe it wasn't totally rational. Maybe he felt that, you know, more with the, you know, a little bit of his neshama, even though he scarred his neshama a lot. But maybe his neshama is feeling that as well.
Okay.
Karen, and then Marguerite.
Just a comment. I once heard somebody talking about the Megillah and the way she painted the picture, I think relates to, we were talking about the quality of things. Because I was trying to tie it in. She talked, you know, there was this big parade of candidates for the throne. Yeah, and you know, these people come and they have all kinds of entertainment and stuff, and Esther was the kind of person who could sit and talk to him, and, you know, they could have interesting conversation. Found that one.
Marguerite.
I used to tell my students that the thing when it says that she finds favor in everybody's eyes because she was so different than everybody else. And then when I used to ask them what was different about her, they all knew to say because she was snare-stick. And that's what.
Yeah, but
That's what is the difference between her and all the other.
that's not what they think.
But even in sneers is not just what's on the surface. It's
Right.
not just the kind
It's
of
from the
clothing,
inside,
right?
nobody else.
The real
She
sneers
was
is an
different.
internal
Right.
midah. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for joining. Hope to see you next week and even before, but
Yeah.
next week for the Gillis Esther.
I'm going anyway, but you can't go.
Yes, I'm going anywhere else. Okay.
Signing off online.
This Shabbat, we still davening in the same